Welcome in to Thursday, January 16th, 2025. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the Fantasy Football Players Championship is now live here on the Better Sports Network. Hi, hello, and welcome to each and every one of you tuning in tonight. I am your host, Eric Balkman. You follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. I'm on the Blue Sky as well at Eric Balkman. .bksy social. I can't remember. So the tags are way too long. Just Eric Balkman on there. You'll find me. So good to have aboard tonight, making his maiden voyage on the HSFF show co-host chair, is the guy that you want to be following on the X, the guy you want to be reading all his work over at Fantasy Points Data, the guy who just put together the definitive FFPC Playoff Challenge Guide last week. You follow him on the X at Chris Wecht, Chris Wecht FF. From Fantasy Points, it is Chris Wecht. Chris, Happy New Year, good evening, and thank you so much for hopping aboard tonight.
Yeah, good to see you too, Eric. It's this is what the probably the best week of football of the whole year. The 8 best teams all trying to play their best to move on, and you get four games of it. It's a fun week.
I was going to ask you about that. Is this your favorite week? I mean, when I was a kid, my dad used to tell me that this divisional playoff weekend was his favorite weekend of football, which kind of, it threw me off. I'm like, well, why this weekend? Why not the conference championships? Why not the Super Bowl? But as I've gotten older, this has turned into my favorite weekend as well, where essentially we have 4 of the best games of the year. Quite frankly, more than half the remaining games on the NFL schedule are going to be played this weekend because we only have 3 games after that. So I think there's a certain melancholy, bittersweet sadness that comes with it. I'm excited for this weekend, although 30,000 foot view, Chris, a lot of high spreads on these games. And I'm wondering if, we didn't see the greatest weekend of wild card football. I'm hoping we don't see 3 blowouts and then just 1 close game again. Is that how you're looking at it?
Yeah, I don't think I think there could be one game that's not super close, but I think the rest all should be pretty close here. I don't, at least I'm not projecting. I do all the projections over at Fantasy Points now, and I'm not seeing any other than the Chiefs game. I'm not seeing any games that should be like crazy different. Maybe the Detroit game, but I kind of like Washington in that game.
Oh, this is going to be a fun show because we are definitely going to get into these matchups, the teams and the players that you need to know in order to win a $100,000 grand prize in the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2 that launched on Monday, and you can register for it right now at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. It's real simple. It's an 8-player lineup. You're picking 1 player per NFL team, no stacking, no drafts, no salary cap. And whoever has the most points for the remainder of the postseason is going to win $100,000. You can enter that $100,000 contest for $200. You can also enter for $35 and have a shot at a $25,000 grand prize. MyFFPC.com is where to go for that. MyFFPC.com. You don't have to mess around with, modifying your lineups throughout the postseason, after the divisional round, after championship weekend. No, once you set it, you forget it until it wins $100,000. That's what you need to do. myffpc.com, or simply scan the QR code that our producer Matt Deutsch has thrown up on the screen. That will take you there as well. Coming up on tonight's show, Chris and I are going to take a spin around the NFL. We're going to talk about some things that happened in the playoffs that will have overarching fallout for the 2025 season. We'll talk about some of the rumors that are circulating, that are being reported on by certain beat writers too. For those of you who are going to be drafting in the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament, which is launching shortly. I believe there's going to be an announcement coming out about that here within the next 48 hours, maybe sooner, about when that tournament launches. And then we will get into our FFPC Playoff Challenge 2 preview. We'll take a look at each and every team, each and every game, and tell you which players we like in the final segment, as Chris and I will build 2 different FFPC Playoff Challenge 2 lineups that you can enter into the challenge yourself and hopefully win a 6-figure grand prize. So to lead things off tonight, Chris, let's stroke your ego a little bit. Let's talk about you for Fantasy Points Data. What are you doing there? You said you're doing all the projections. What's it like during the season and in the off season for you for everything you're doing there?
Yeah, so in season, mostly projections, all weekly projections, rest of season projections, anything with that we're projecting guys forward. That's on my plate. So mostly what I'm doing, looking at 500 something skill players every single week, and spitting out stat lines for those guys. I'm also then, this is mostly more in the off season, but still in season a little bit. Fantasy points data is something that I was a huge part of in setting up over the past few years. Pretty much every data point on there is something that I had a hand in creating. I used to chart many of the data points before I was doing projections. That's how I got my start in here, was charting football, watching games, just recording data, watching every play from every game. I set up all that infrastructure and how that works. But yeah, that's everything I've been doing. We've been launching a lot of cool stuff. Our separation data is our newest thing that we added this year, which is super cool stuff. So every single route a receiver runs, we're assigning that player a grade on if he won the route, lost the route, and to what degree he won or lost. So it kind of helps you remove the quarterback play from the receiver play, and like really lets us judge how good receivers are, and kind of helps you get is Quentin Johnson really good, or did they just have him running 9 go routes over and over and over again? I think we got like mixed results this year, so it was probably a little bit of both, but definitely helps us identify guys that could be on the verge of having big games or big seasons after collecting this data.
All right. You didn't bury the lead, but you're not focusing on the best part, or my favorite part of what Fantasy Points did this year. And I don't know if it was you or Scott Barrett. It sounds like it was you. You talk about the separation grade. It is the ASS score, which is what I love. I've been saying it all season. Average separation score. The ASS rating is something that Fantasy Points has brought to us this year, and I love it. Did you come up with this? Did Scott, was this a collaboration? And I noticed you didn't call it that. Let's get the branding going, Chris. This is the ASS score for these receivers. I love it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Scott came up with the ASS actual name. It was a team effort in deciding, like how we wanted to actually display the number, and ultimately we've got our separation score, the ASS score. That's what you mentioned. It's just called separation score on the site, so just so no one's confused.
Right.
And then we have our win rate as well, which is like the percentage, removes the like how much did they win by or lose by, and just like a binary yes or no, did they win on their route. So you got like 2 metrics there, but pretty good. We're pretty happy with the results this year. I'm trying to think of some guys that were popping last year. Rashad Bateman, he's been every year he ranks in the top of this thing, and I think we know he's never going to be the team's wide receiver 1 for the Ravens, but he definitely has shown this year his ability to get open big and score big touchdowns. He was a big hit for the separation stuff. I'm trying to think. Tank Dell was at the top of the list this year. Didn't have a great year. He was also at the top of the list last year. The elite guys are always up there. Mike Evans, Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen was the Bears, for fantasy, he was the Bears' best wide receiver. Mm-hmm. He's just been a master route runner. That shouldn't really surprise anybody, and it carried over to a new team. Nico Collins, another guy last year that was in the top 10. Absolutely huge year from him. So yeah, really, we're really happy with it. And a lot of those guys I mentioned didn't have awesome QB play where they came from. So pretty happy with what the results look like.
Was there anybody who maybe had a good fantasy season that was not high on that list that might present a potential red flag for 2025?
That's a good question. Let me see here.
And while you look, and I'll just say this too, like I'm with you. I think if you look at the top of this list, there are some surprising names towards the top, but by and large, it is the creme de la creme is usually at the top of this list. You will not find a whole lot, if any, of guys with really good fantasy seasons, or guys who are really, pedigreed receivers in the league towards the bottom of the ass, for lack of a better term. But is there anybody that, as you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that guy thought he'd be rated high, or thought he'd have a higher rating on here, but it didn't happen this year?
Yeah, so Debo is a guy that never really has like really popped in it. Like that's not his thing. He's the yards after catch guy and stuff. But you really see when a guy like him, like who doesn't pop in separation, when he loses that little extra juice, that like one twitchiness that he had to him, when he loses that a little bit as he gets older, like it falls off a cliff real quick. Like we were
Hmm.
just talking about Keenan Allen's the total opposite. Like he's older, but he's just been so good at separating his whole career that he can get older, he can decline with his speed and stuff, and it not be a huge deal. Let's see who else. I mean, Quentin Johnson didn't rank great again this year. That's not great for him
Right.
for next year. Um, Not too many guys that had like awesome seasons, but ranked really bad in ass. The Seattle guys didn't rank great outside of JSN, DK, and Lockett. Lockett is probably not that surprising, and we saw him take a step back this year. But DK
Hi-
being low is not great for him probably moving forward either.
yeah, historically, has he been a guy that has never ranked very high? Or I mean, I guess since it's a new stat, I mean, maybe you have not gone back into previous seasons to look at it.
I don't remember him as being a guy that ranked terribly, but I will say the Seahawks don't necessarily. He's not the type of guy that gets a lot of. So a guy is kind of limited to what the team kind of lets him do. If a guy is just asked to run 9 routes, go routes over and over again, which is a lot of what DK does, a lot of those
Yeah.
deep routes, posts, corners, go routes, it's harder to separate on those. But when you do separate, it's usually results in a bigger score. So that can limit guys if they're just not asked to do things like that. He he isn't always asked to do that, but that is something. Yeah, so he had a 0.1 separation score last year, which is a pretty good score for especially for the type of routes that he's running. Like I said, you really want these guys that are running like horizontally breaking routes, crossing routes. That's why like Amon Ra and I'm trying Ben Johnson, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniels. They do
Mhm.
all these like crossing routes, moving horizontally on the field. That's really what lets guys get open and separate well because they're getting to make those hard cuts and then get corners or zone defenders off of them.
To learn more about the Ask Score, fantasypoints.com is where to go and read all about it. Something that I've found not only interesting and fun, but very informative and helped me this season as well. And it's going to help me going forward as far as drafts go in 2025 and beyond. Let's go around the NFL here, Chris, and talk first off in Carolina. The Athletic had a report come out yesterday morning from Joe Person, who said that there's an anonymous Panther source stating that Bryce Young's footwork at the end of this season was, quote, light years of where it was at the start of the 2024 campaign. When he was benched at the end of September, the Panthers coaches had him working on footwork and dropbacks and trying to figure out how he can get himself in position to make good decisions and make good throws. He was doing these jump throws, which weren't working out. Andy Dalton kind of helped him out with this as well. The last 7 games of the season, only 6 quarterbacks had a higher completion rate over expected from weeks 11 to 18. 251 yards, 3 touchdowns against Atlanta in an upset when quite frankly the Falcons needed to have that game. He looks so much better than what he did in 2024 and the first part of the season. And I think we won't get to see him now until the start of the 2025 season. But Chris, where do you think he is going to rank for you among quarterbacks next year? Is being a top 15 option, drafting him in the top 15 quarterbacks next year, is that too aggressive? Or do you think it's going to be warranted based on how he ended this season?
Sounds a little aggressive to me off the top of my head, trying to think through the other quarterbacks, but there's no doubt he did get better in the back half of the season. I mean, if I was a Panthers fan, like I think in the beginning of the season there was probably not a fan base that you thought had it worse with the Panthers. They draft this guy first overall and he just looks like it's a total bust. But by the end
Mhm.
of the year, there definitely is something to work with there. Like they're in a lot better position than the Saints or the Raiders and these the Jets. Like I would much rather be a Panthers fan with Bryce Young than I would be some of these other teams. So I mean, Dave Canales, we saw what he did with Baker Mayfield. He clearly got some development out of Bryce Young. I feel like they're going to give him another shot in this next year. who knows what their expectations are. We know their owner David Tepper really wants to win. I don't think they're going to be close to that. They still have a roster with tons of holes on them, and that's probably part of the reason that's going to keep Bryce Young from being a top 15 QB for me, because the O line is average at best. The receiving core, we really don't know anything about. Adam Thielen's going to be another year older. He might even be a free agent. I'm not sure. Um, it's hard to, without some like a bona fide wide receiver one getting in that receiving room. I don't see Bryce Young getting into that top 15 territory.
Do you not think that Xavier Legette has what it takes to be a number one receiver? I mean, is he just is him being a complimentary guy his ceiling in the NFL?
Well, would you say he was the best rookie receiver on his team this year? I mean, it's hard to say Jalen Coker didn't outplay him in this season. Well, if you removed where these guys were drafted, I'd be more excited about Coker than Legette right now. I still think Legette can be a good player, but it's not great that, you know, an undrafted, I think he was undrafted, Jalen Coker outplayed him this year in a room where he had plenty of opportunity. You know, they trade Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen misses most of the year, Jonathan Mingo is gone, and it still never really clicked for Legette in a full way. Doesn't mean it can't, but we just time and again see this over and over when these early, especially these early round receivers, don't get hit the ground running at some point during their rookie year. It just never really clicks all the way for them. Quentin Johnson's the most obvious one, but there's been plenty over the years that when they don't hit right away, it seems to never really come to fruition.
Adam Thielen is under contract with the Panthers one more year. However, there is a potential out in his contract. If the two sides wanted to part ways, they certainly could. But the cupboard's kind of bare, to your point there. And Bryce Young really, I mean, part of the reason that he came on so well at the end of the year was the sure hands and the precise route running of Adam Thielen. I'm sure they'd like to have him back next year as well. This next story, I think, is a nothing burger, Chris, but I do want to get your opinion on it because the Browns have a new offensive coordinator, and his name is Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees, a guy who was a quarterback for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, kind of a highly touted one too. He actually was the offensive coordinator for the Irish from 2020 to 2022, worked under Nick Saban as the offensive coordinator for the Crimson Tide in 2023, and then tight ends coach and passing game coordinator this past season in Cleveland. Now, anytime there's a new offensive coordinator, we all sit up and take notice. Does this one mean less given the fact that Kevin Stefanski is going to be the guy calling plays for Cleveland? You know, he already is, and he will be next year as well. And also the fact that we don't know the type of offense Rees is going to be coordinating. We don't know what the plan is at quarterback. Quite frankly, we kind of don't know what the plan is at running back. We know Njoku's going to be there. We know Judy's going to be there. Obviously, Elijah Moore as well. But there's a lot that we don't know about this Cleveland offense, which is why I think it's important not to overrate the Tommy Rees promotion to the offensive coordinator for the Browns.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by this because we're never really going to know this answer, but it would be really interesting to know like who everyone's that was signed off on the Deshaun Watson deal and and insisted on him playing as long, like was Stefanski part of that? Like if I was the Browns ownership, assuming that, you know, obviously he signed off on it, but I would probably want to just like start from scratch, clean house. And this move signals that they clearly are going to run it back with Stefanski and they think they liked what they saw enough out of their offense and particularly their passing game. We saw Joe Flacco have a nice run there. Jameis Winston was, as Jameis Winston always is, very a roller coaster ride. DTR didn't ever show us anything. It's a little surprising. I would think they'd want some like fresh eyes in there to like get some outside opinions on things and really try to get some new juice into this passing offense. Because I don't think we've ever seen, I mean, maybe in Stefanski's early years with Baker and stuff, like they have never really been a juggernaut offense and not really shown any signs of developing one either.
I think the Browns skill position players in general, obviously everybody's on my board, right? Because at some point these players will be drafted at a spot I am comfortable picking them at. However, I can't imagine I'm going to be targeting too many players. Now, if Cleveland doesn't do a whole lot of running back in the offseason, then yeah, Ford is interesting to me at a certain point. I think it would be unwise to just discount what Jerry Jeudy did down the stretch here. And if Winston is named the starter, to kick off the year, then all of a sudden I have a lot more intrigue in this team. But I think until then, you are really, if you're drafting, you are really drafting based on projections and upside of a team that we just don't know what they're going to be exactly. I think you're right. I think we're on the right path, that it's going to be very close to what we saw this year, but we don't know exactly until we figure out what's happening at quarterback, what's happening at running back. Let's stay in the same division, Chris, and talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who saw their season come to an end Saturday evening in Baltimore at the hands of the Ravens. Mike Tomlin speaking to the media after the game that, and I think this might have been the day after or 2 days after in his end of season press conference, but he didn't really endorse, let's say, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields coming back to quarterback the team this upcoming season. Both of them, I think, had flashes. Both of them, we saw what their limitations are, especially for Mr. Unlimited this year. Down the stretch, Russell Wilson was not great. And I don't know if Pittsburgh brings him back. Fields is going to be a free agent as well. And Fields is the type of guy where he's young enough and he's shown enough on the field that some team might want to take a chance on him and bring him in either as a guy they want to groom to be their long-term starter, or as a bridge quarterback if they are drafting, Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders or something like that. Fields, 21st in quarterback success rate among 42 qualifying quarterbacks. Russell Wilson was 33rd. Again, when we look at Pittsburgh going forward here, this is another team that it's a little bit nebulous, right? Of what we can project for 2025, knowing that one of these guys could be back, both of them could be back, or maybe more likely, Chris, either one of these guys is back for the Steelers this coming fall.
Yeah, Steelers have to be one of the most interesting offseason candidates for teams, is like, because what are they going to do at quarterback? Are they going to bring a guy back? Do they not bring a guy back? And if they don't, what in the world are they going to try to do then?
Yeah.
Do they go try to grab Sam Darnold or something like that, another bridge QB? They're not going to be high enough in the draft. It's a weak QB class already. So, man, drafting Steelers is going to be tough until we start to see some dominoes fall and what who's going to be playing for them. Najee Harris is a free agent. He's likely going to be gone as well. I don't see them really bringing him back unless he doesn't have much of a market. It's a little ugly there in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure what they're going to do this year, or how you even put a value on these guys right now.
It's interesting. Especially with how talented it looks. And I haven't done a full-fledged deep dive into this year's rookie running back class, but it looks like it's fairly, what's the line from Meet the Parents, where Owen Wilson asked Ben Stiller how his portfolio is looking, and he said strong to quite strong. That's the way the running back class looks this year. To me, at first blush, it looks like it's strong to quite strong. So Pittsburgh could easily add somebody, but if they don't, Jaylen Warren is very interesting to me. Jaylen Warren might still be very interesting to me as maybe the best playmaker Pittsburgh has on their team, if they decide that they don't want to be in the George Pickens business anymore. Mike DeFabo, who covers the Steelers for The Athletic, says that Pittsburgh should think about trading away Pickens this offseason because of, immaturity, maybe not having, I don't want to say the mental toughness, but the fortitude to push through in games where he is not getting the ball, he is not seeing a lot of targets. Poor quarterback play definitely affecting his numbers. Mike Tomlin said after the Week 13 against the Bengals that Pickens needs to grow up. There are a decent amount of receivers that will probably make it to free agency. Not all these guys will, but Higgins and Godwin, Amari Cooper, Hollywood Brown, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs is going to be a free agent, DeAndre Hopkins. If the Steelers wanted to go down that path, they could. But for dynasty players who are watching this, what's the proper way to handle George Pickens this offseason, knowing that his future in Pittsburgh is kind of cloudy? Should we be looking at him as a buy low type guy right now, or do you want to get out while you still can of the George Pickens business, Chris? What do you think Pickens' future looks like, at least not necessarily long term, but as far as 2025 goes?
I'd have to bet he's still on the Steelers in 2020. I mean, the Steelers are not flush with offensive talent or any kind of offensive juice. They need guys like George Pickens. I know he's immature. They've a long history of getting good production out of receivers that seem they're immature at times. So like if there's a place for him to succeed, he's probably in it. He probably just needs to not be relied on as heavily as he is. I don't know if they'll be able to add another receiver that can help alleviate that, but I'd be shocked if he was not on the Steelers in 2025. And that being said, like for dynasty purposes, it probably makes him. I'm kind of just in like the hold territory because I don't think you can sell him for a whole lot because people are unsure of the quarterback situation and whatnot. But I also don't think he's a bad player at all. I think we know he's a good player. He's shown it time and again, and he's also very young. You're going to have a hard time coming across a talented player like this at the age he is for what he would cost. But I'm probably not like going out of my way to add him either. If I could, if you can get him for cheap, then sure. But like, it's a tough spot. I'd probably just hold him if I had him, and probably not really seek him out either, unless like somebody's just dying to get rid of him.
Which may or may not happen. I mean, I've seen,
Right.
I've been in dynasty leagues like this before, where some people, if you get the right guy who owns them, they may just want to part ways, and they're willing to take 70 cents on the dollar for him or 65 cents on the dollar. And that's when I think he is worth the risk at that point. Earlier this afternoon, Chris, the Vikings GM, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, spoke with the media in his season-ending press conference that most, if not all, GMs do around the league. And he was asked about Sam Darnold and what his future was with the Vikings after having 2 consecutive games, including a playoff bottoming out against the Los Angeles Rams in Arizona this past Monday night. That is not the way you wanted the season to end for Sam Darnold if you're Darnold or in his camp. Maybe this gives you clarity if you're the Vikings on how to handle Darnold going forward, knowing you have the number 10 overall pick in the draft, J.J. McCarthy, who looked all right. Granted, it was preseason, in preseason last year, and a guy who maybe is ready to take the reins next year. Certainly having playmakers like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson, and a backfield that may or may not include Aaron Jones next year, that will ease in the transition. I want to focus on Darnold with this conversation because there is a school of thought out there that, or at least some people out there, and you might be able to lump me into this group of people, that believe Sam Darnold was able to have a magical season, not only from great coaching from Kevin O'Connell, but great playmakers on that team as well. Whereas if you were to take Sam Darnold and plunk him on the Raiders next year, or as what you just mentioned, the Steelers next year, I think his numbers take a step back. This is a guy who was in the MVP conversation halfway through the season, and now we have seen the old Darnold, what some people are calling the real Darnold, to end the season. What do you make of him? What's going to happen to him? What would you do if you were the Vikings? And how would you handle drafting him if you are drafting in January or February, knowing that Vikings could easily put the franchise tag on him? They could easily just let him go to free agency as well.
Yeah, I think they have to move on from him. I mean, they kind of saw what their seasons could look like if you stick around with a guy like Darnold, even on the franchise tag. Like, this is your ceiling. You're probably not competing with the elite teams. The NFC isn't super strong, so maybe if you catch lightning in the bottle at the right time, then maybe you get lucky. But that's not the way you build your team. You build your team for sustained success. And JJ McCarthy is the way you get there. He's on a rookie QB deal. He's cheap. You don't make that pick and then go spend all this money to keep a guy like Sam Darnold around. Like you said, we know what he is. We don't need to see him dropped on another team. We've seen him on multiple teams for years, and it's never been that pretty. We saw him in San Francisco last year for a little bit, and it was fine. It wasn't as good. We saw Nick Mullins literally play better in that offense in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So he's probably leaving. He's probably some team is going to take a shot on him because the QB class is not the strongest. So he'll probably be starting somewhere, or at the very least, he'll be the favorite in a training camp battle. But I don't see the world where the Vikings don't hand it over to McCarthy and try to build this thing for a future run with a rookie QB.
Speaking of rookie QBs, we saw some pretty good ones this year. Caleb Williams had his ups and downs. Jayden Daniels was awesome. Bo Nix was awesome. Drake May a little shaky to start off, but he looked really awesome at the end of the year. JJ McCarthy was drafted in the midst of these guys, and he is going to step in. If he is the starter, he's going to step into a team with a lot of talent and a pretty decent, albeit not perfect offensive line. What kind of season is McCarthy in for in 2025, assuming he is the starter and assuming all these weapons are going to be around him?
I think it's a pretty big one. Brett Whitefield, our draft guy over at Fantasy Points, actually had McCarthy as his highest graded QB in this class. He was never a big Caleb guy. He liked Jayden Daniels. He liked certain things about Drake May. And Brett's he knows his stuff when it comes to college QBs and stuff, and he's been right on a lot of things. So if he thinks that that's where he could play, and we saw guys like, I'm sure Jayden Daniels and Bo Nix especially, blew everybody's expected. Nobody expected that. Nobody could have expected what these guys have done. But regardless, if McCarthy could be the number one QB on some teams' boards, on other evaluators' boards, he's got the ceiling that Sam Darnold does at the very least. I think we have to say that, and it could be, maybe it's not a ton more, but I would imagine the mistakes and the brutal sacks, some of the terrible picks are just less in this offense.
I want to stay in the same division once again, move on from Minnesota and talk about the Packers here. We found out Wes Hodkiewicz, who covers Green Bay for Packers.com, announced reported that Matt LaFleur said Jayden Reed is not going to need offseason surgery on the shoulder that he hurt in the wild card loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Got hurt in the third quarter, never came back to the game. 55 catches, 857 yards, and 6 touchdowns this season, which is okay. But when you consider in his rookie year, he had 9 more catches for 64 fewer yards and 2 more touchdowns. You were probably hoping, if you were a Jayden Reed owner, for him to build on that 2023 a little bit better than what he did. Wasn't all his fault. I think the Packers offense was definitely different this year than it was in 2023, given the addition of Josh Jacobs and how they really transformed into a power ground game. What makes Reed so interesting to me for next season is the fact, and I think this, I don't want to say it's becoming popular opinion. Chris, I'm in Northeast Wisconsin, not very far from Lambeau Field. And I think more and more people are becoming bearish about Christian Watson suiting up at all in 2025 because he tore his ACL here in early January. His father was on Twitter. His father, a former Packer himself, came out and said he thinks that Christian Watson is going to be back, quote, about week 12 or around there, end quote, something like that, which to me, the worst source for injury projections and prognostication is the player themselves. Probably the second worst source, the player's family, who are going to be pretty optimistic on when their brother, their son, their uncle, whatever, is going to be back on the field. I still think that Watson misses the entire season, and the Packers, I think the call nationwide from a lot of pundits out there, a lot of people who cover the game, say that Green Bay needs a more reliable number one receiver. Brian Gutekunst, in his closing press conference today, said that ideally he wants all these guys to develop into the type of guy who can make a play for you on 3rd and 6, who can make a play for you on 4th and 4, who can get into the end zone, in the red zone when it becomes more difficult to pass. That's ideally. I don't know if that ideal is going to take place with Watson, Dobbs, Wicks, any of these guys. I do think they add somebody this offseason. And I do think if they do, Reed is still kind of fulfilling the same role as he did in 2025. If anything, Chris, I think his value is going to be depressed in drafts. I think his value is a little bit depressed in dynasty right now because of the kind of scattershot approach that we had as fantasy players to Packers wide receivers, knowing that some weeks there was going to be value. You just didn't know who it was going to be from. And knowing that some weeks there wouldn't be any value in these Packers receivers. But I do think we as fantasy players know that and are going to unfairly push Reed further down than where he should go. And I think he might be a nice buy, a nice bounce back player for 2025. How are you seeing Jayden Reed's third season in the NFL, which is upcoming?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, he's definitely going to get pushed down because of the disappointing season. Christian Watson is probably not playing, or at the very least, he's going to miss almost the entire fantasy season. I agree with you. I think they wanted some guy to develop into that number one guy for them this year and thought they had this embarrassment of riches and we're just going to let them figure it out. But I think this room clearly needs like a veteran wide receiver presence to like help these guys grow. So like let's say they add an Amari Cooper in free agency or something like that. I think Jayden Reed benefits from that more than anybody. One, because Watson's not there. Dobbs would probably be hurt the most by that like veteran
Yeah.
guy, ex receiver type thing. So Reed could still be doing his stuff. And then Wicks, I think Wicks we kind of saw he went back to his college season, senior year season where like he just can't catch balls for whatever reason. And we see those guys in the NFL all the time. And we think sometimes you think it might be working itself out and then it just falls off a cliff again. And teams get frustrated by that. I mean, Deontay Johnson's outside of his, his maturity issues. He's also had those issues through his career where like he'll just go through these runs where he like can't catch an open pass. I think Jayden Reed's a pretty good value. I know Jordan Love wasn't this elite QB that we thought he might be taking a step into, but I don't think he's a bad QB. So
Yeah.
it's all the same bet, but probably a better environment overall without Watson.
I think that this, as much as I caution people to not draft Packers receivers this year, because I never, I never had full confidence in knowing who the guy to play on a week to week basis was. While I don't think that changes too much in 2025, I do think the Packers offense takes a step forward. I think Love takes a step forward, and a rising tide raises all ships. And the fact that I think a lot of these Packers receivers are going to fall a little bit to maybe a spot I'm more comfortable drafting them at where I wasn't in 2024. I think we need to be on the lookout for that. We'll be following that definitely this offseason. Death, taxes, and Mike Evans getting 1,000-yard season, Chris. These are the three truths that we know of here living on planet Earth. Mike Evans in the playoffs did not disappoint either. In the loss to the Commanders, 7 targets, 7 catches, 92 yards, and a touchdown. He got 11 touchdowns and 74 catches this season, just over 1,000 receiving yards. He only played in 14 games this season. He will be in his age 32 season coming up this fall and trying to go 12 years in a row with 1,000-yard season. I know he's getting up there in the age, but the fact that Chris Godwin might not be a Buccaneer this upcoming season, it seems like they have Jalen McMillan ready to take his spot. Knowing that Baker Mayfield led the league in touchdown passes, this all without Dave Canales, who we're all worried about was going to tank this Buccaneers offense. It didn't happen under Liam Cohen, the new offensive coordinator this year for Tampa. I guess he could be gone too, but the fact that it was so seamless with a coordinator transition, I do think that Mike Evans is going to be drafted high again this year. I don't think too high. I'm betting on maybe not 1,000-yard season, but man, you could do a lot worse than Mike Evans catching, 7-8 touchdowns again and 900 plus receiving yards. I like Evans again, even though his age is getting up there. Chris, how do you feel about him coming up in drafts this season?
So I was just checking. He was our number 4 player in AS this season, minimum 100 routes run among receivers. So and he ran. We could bump that route qualifier up even higher. So he would be like number 1 out of guys that ran like over 250 routes. So I don't think he's lost a step. Chris Godwin might be gone. We'll see about that. If he's not, I don't think it's a huge deal. Liam Cohen's the big key there. Like we don't want him leaving Tampa Bay. So it'll be interesting to see what the Bucs do with Bowles and if Cohen gets a job offer. That would be the one thing I'm worried about. But I don't. And Mike Evans probably drops in drafts a little compared to where he was going this year. So he's probably going to be cheaper. I think you fire it back up with Mike Evans this year, and with Baker looking pretty awesome this year too.
I'm looking at it right now. I'm going to go to Darren Armani, Fantasy Mojo's website, who keeps track of all this FFPC data. And I always like to look back, especially this time of year, to see where these guys were going at the point of, when drafting season ended last year. Loading it up right now to find out where Mike. Oh God, my computer's not cooperating. I will try to find it here shortly. But I think that Evans was a guy. Even this year, I wasn't averse to drafting. And I think because of his age, he might slip a little bit, which makes him all the more palatable for 2025 drafts as well, to have him on your team. I don't know if you want to trust him as a top 12 guy, but top 24 for sure, maybe even top 16, top 17 player at the wide receiver position for this upcoming season. I'm definitely bullish on Mike Evans. And I'll tell you a player I wasn't terribly bullish on coming into the season, but boy, did he give me the warm fuzzies more the more Broncos football I watched this past year, Chris. Bo Nix, 13 of 22, 144 yards and a touchdown in their 31-7 wild card loss to the Bills. He did also get 43 rushing yards on 4 carries. I think what we have seen this year from Nix is a guy that handcuffed is too strong of a word, but I think Sean Payton only allowed him to do so much. And when he did have the possibility of a big play or making a big play, he took advantage of it. Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin all had flashes throughout the year. And those guys I would think are probably, Franklin and Mims for sure coming back. We'll see about Sutton. I think Sutton's coming back as well. I'd have to check his contract status. But the fact that, he was kept under wraps most of the season. He should make a bigger leap and will be allowed to do more in this Broncos offense in year 2. He's still going to have those legs that are going to allow him to make plays. He was an older product coming in to the NFL. He is going to be 25 in February, I believe. So with Nix coming into his own seemingly this season and doing better than I thought he was going to do, I'm excited about him next year. Let me ask you this. Who are you more excited about? Who would you draft first between Bo Nix and Bryce Young in like a super flex league next year?
That's definitely Bo Nix. Receiving core, I think, makes that pretty easy. Just assuming Sutton is back, I think they figured out how to use Marvin Mims a little bit. Bo Nix was top 10 in over at Fantasy Points Data in catchable throw rate, accurate throw rate, adjusted net yards per attempt. Like all things you want your QB to be good at. I think you're right that Sean Payton didn't unleash him fully.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully you kind of see that a little bit more. Maybe he's taking some more deep shots, stuff like that. They let him keep using his legs. That would be important for his fantasy value. That's not like the rushing side is not something you're getting with Bryce Young at all, really, because he doesn't even really scramble, let alone design runs. Bo Nix gives you that. I think Bo Nix is it'll be interesting to see where he goes in drafts, but he's probably kind of that sneaky, Konami code mobile QB that doesn't go as high as he probably could be going if we see a big season out of him.
The biggest coaching news that we saw this week, Chris Wecht from Fantasy Points, was the Patriots hiring Mike Vrabel, former player for the Patriots, now is their new head coach. Formerly of the Tennessee Titans, where he went 54-45 in 6 years, got them to a number 1 seed 1 year as well. I think that there's a lot of pros, there's a lot of cons. I shouldn't say there's a lot of cons. There's some cons with this from a fantasy standpoint. We know that when he was the head coach in Tennessee, his teams did not throw a lot. A couple of reasons for that. They weren't exactly talent rich in the passing game. And they were very talent rich in the running game with Derrick Henry. Your thoughts on how how Mike Vrabel is going to affect Drake May's development in year 2? New England does have a lot of cash to spend. Do you like this hire for fantasy purposes for Drake May?
Well, I don't know if you saw there was I don't know what show he was on, but he was talking about how teams that run the ball a certain number of times have like a 90% win percentage or something like that. So that's not great. He clearly hasn't learned from his time away from coaching that teams that run a lot are usually winning already, and that's why they're running the ball. The Patriots don't have a Derrick Henry. we'll see what happens in their running back room, but they don't have Derrick Henry. They have even less than the Titans had at receiver probably, which is not great. Drake May is going to have to do some pretty, I think, like otherworldly things to like really smash in fantasy next year. One, if they can unleash his rushing, that would be huge. But they got to get him some receiving help. The offensive line is a mess, and you add in the fact that we know Vrabel's going to want to run the ball the second he gets the opportunity to. It's not looking great right now, I think, for fantasy purposes for Drake May.
Yeah, and obviously this could change. I correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Vrabel's hired an offensive coordinator yet, has he?
That's why I was trying to look. I don't see anything
I,
about
I,
who might be the
yeah,
offensive coordinator.
I know he was talking about Josh McDaniels, being on the short list for offensive coordinator, but he also I shouldn't say the short list because I think he said it was kind of a long list that he had for potential offensive coordinator hiring. So we'll see what happens there, but definitely a situation to monitor. I'm with you. I'm not exactly thrilled with this for fantasy purposes. Maybe a good hire for the Patriots for NFL purposes. For fantasy, yeah, I'm not liking this as of right now. I'll tell you what I am liking. Holy mother of God, lad freaking McConkey this year. Did not disappoint in the playoffs. Maybe had his biggest game of the year in the Chargers' loss to the Texans. 9 catches, 197 yards, and a touchdown. Most yards by a rookie in NFL playoff history. He only missed 1 game this season. Finished 23rd in targets among wide receivers, 9th in receiving yards, and 15th in wide receiver receptions this year. And bear in mind that the Chargers were a power ground game with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards throughout the first half of the season. 5 games with more than 90 receiving yards, 7 games with at least 6 catches. And if you look at what he did this year as a rookie, this is definitely going to shoot him way up draft boards next year. Where would you be comfortable, again, in a tight end premium, full PPR format like the FFPC, Chris? Where would you be comfortable taking McConkey? Is it 3rd round? Is it higher than that? Is it later than that? I feel like it's. I mean, I'm sure there might be some sort of regression to the mean coming this season, but given how quiet he was in the first half of the season, maybe it's not a big one. I'm a big McConkey fan here going forward.
Yeah, I think 3rd round seems pretty comfortable to me for him. I mean, we don't see rookie receivers have a game like that very often, and it wasn't like a one-off. Yeah, that big of a game was a one-off, but we've definitely seen him have big games throughout the season. We just don't it's a little surprising how little. I mean, I guess Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. are kind of like overshadowing him a little bit, but he had a really strong rookie season for a receiver and in an offense where like he was the only guy. They had Quentin Johnson was fine at best and really tailed off at the end. Josh Palmer was fine and then got hurt. Didn't really have a legit tight end, and Will Disley, he's a fine tight end. It'll be interesting to see what they add to their receiving core. I don't think they're a team that goes at. I mean, maybe they draft one high, but I don't think they like spend a ton of money on a huge value guy in free agency or anything like that. So if it's similar, and we'll see what they do in the draft to what he had this year, he's going to get I think he's going to get a boatload of targets again. He's like Malik Neighbors, but has a much better QB.
I think the biggest question I have, and maybe this is overrated, he's just got to stay on the field. And I see some of the
Yeah.
shots he took, and I know he's not the biggest guy in the world. Sometimes I think I overrate that kind of stuff, and maybe it's not a huge deal, but certainly as long as he's on the field, man, he can be a real game wrecker and a real problem for defenses around the league. That's what's going on in the NFL. I want to take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the FFPC Playoff Challenge too. Let's break down these games. Let's look at the players from each of these teams that will either make or break your chances at winning $100,000 in the FFPC yet this season. He is Chris Wecht from Fantasy Points Data. I'm Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. We roll on right after this. You talk about utilizing something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like an Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Bears Sports Network rolls on here, 9 minutes until the top of the hour. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Chris Wecht from Fantasy Points and Fantasy Points Data, taking you through your guide through the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2, which will have its lineups lock at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time this Saturday, right before the Texans and the Chiefs kick off. We're going to give you our full analysis on the players you want, the players you want to fade for that competition. Remember, you can join that right now over at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. 2 contests going on. It's the same format for both. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. You're choosing 8 players that you want, and then you lock those players in for the duration of the playoffs. Whatever players you get to Super Bowl Sunday, you'll get double points in that game for said players. So you're not fading anybody on any teams. You're picking 1 player per team, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and 2 flexes. You want to go with a 3 tight end lineup? Go ahead. 4 wide receivers, 4 running backs. It's totally up to you. myffpc.com is where to go. Enter for $200 and take a shot at a $100,000 grand prize. You can also enter for $35 and win $25,000. There is still time to win a 6-figure grand prize in fantasy football this season. myffpc.com is where to go for that. Let's get into how we're handling this, how we're handicapping these players, and what we're looking for in this divisional playoff round of the playoffs here, Chris. We'll kick things off with the first game, the Texans and the Chiefs. And with the visiting Houston squad, a lot of people had them losing last week to Los Angeles. They kind of ran away with that game. Big-time performances by the defense. I think C.J. Stroud had a solid game. Joe Mixon was great as well. Now, Joe Mixon, I think, is interesting here. He is listed as questionable for the divisional round game against the Chiefs. He popped up as limited after an ankle injury that he suffered in practice yesterday. Did not practice today and is now listed as questionable. Could he not practice today? Possibly. Was he held out just, to take it easy, to make sure he's absolutely good to go for Saturday? Also possibly. The advantage we have in, if we want to roster Mixon as our Texans player of choice, was the inactives will come out 90 minutes before kickoff. And that's also 90 minutes before lineups lock in this contest. Knowing that Mixon was so integral in beating the Chargers last week, how do you handle this injury? What are you looking for? And is it enough for you to want to differentiate from Nico Collins to pick Joe Mixon here? He may not be facing a positive game script as well. Mixon with this injury, man, this kind of confuses us.
Yeah, it's, I thought earlier before this, Mixon I thought was kind of sneaky to get off of Nico, just because I think everybody is going to want to play Nico, rightfully so. Like I would rather play Nico, but Mixon was that guy that, like, he's going to get a ton of volume, whether they're losing or not. They are going to throw to him. And you just kind of need him to fall into the end zone and Nico not to. With the injury, it does make it a little shakier. There's not a lot of running backs that, like, I think people will be, well, there is a lot of running backs, but I think people will also, the teams with the running backs also have receivers that people, I think, really want to play. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't hate playing Mixon, but I'll definitely be watching closely to see if we get any more info from a coach or anything about, like, how, if they think it's going to limit him at all in the game or anything at all. Because if we do get any kind of word that, like, he's not going to be that, because that's what you're betting on is the volume. He's not going to be super efficient. He's not Jahmyr Gibbs. So, like, he's got to get the volume. So if there's any hint of him not getting a pretty big workload here, I'm probably just looking away from Mixon and going to Nico Collins or even a Dalton Schultz in a you just hope he gets the touchdown situation.
I want to talk about Schultz in a second. Let me throw this at you, and I didn't think about this till just now. Dameon Pierce is the backup. Dameon Pierce, we saw what he could do in Week 18. If you are projecting a Chiefs win, where you are only getting one game out of the Texans anyway, and Mixon is ruled out for this game, how interesting or uninteresting does Dameon Pierce become for you in this competition?
I'd stay away because I just think that Dare Gumbalale will get all the passing or a lot of the passing work there, whereas Mixon, they're pretty comfortable letting him do everything. I don't think they'll trust Pierce like they trust Mixon in pass protection and stuff. So I'm probably just staying away from the running back room if that happens.
2 catches for 23 yards on 4 targets. That was the receiving line for one Dalton Schultz against the Chargers. 6 games with at least 4 catches in the regular season. He was 3rd in targets in this game against the Chargers. 43 dropbacks for CJ Stroud. Schultz was running a route on 35 of those. He is not on the injury report, despite dealing with some shoulder soreness, I believe. Full practice today. And if you do have to throw a lot, if you are Houston and you don't want to play Nico Collins, if you are playing in this competition because you want to be different, how sneaky is Dalton Schultz? I'll give you a bit of background on this. So I was talking with an FFPC player who, granted, admitted to me he does not have a whole lot of success in this competition, this playoff challenge too. And he emailed me after our conversation. And he said, the more I'm building lineups to this, the more I keep coming back to Dalton Schultz. And he doesn't like Schultz at all, but he kept coming back to him as a pivot play. If you don't want to have Nico Collins, who's going to have massive ownership in this, Schultz might be the guy. It feels kind of gross to put him in your lineup, but if it's one and done and Collins gets bottled up and Schultz gets a lot of underneath stuff, there is a non-zero chance, Chris, that Dalton Schultz might be the proper Texan to roster for this competition.
Yeah, if you're the Chiefs, right? Like, they're game planning, they're looking at this and going, all right, like, how do we just slow down Nico Collins? Like, let's make anybody else beat us. And no, they probably can't totally slow down Nico Collins, but can they just limit him in some way? I think you're on I was kind of leaning the Mixon route, but the more I think about it, I think Schultz is probably the pivot play you want to do. They also won't have Cade Stover for this game, their backup tight end. Mm-hmm. We saw this earlier in the season, and, like, Irv Smith, their 3rd tight end, like, barely played at all. So, like, Schultz is going to be out there pretty much every route. We think they're going to be behind. Robert Woods is also questionable for this game. Just another target that might also be missing. They cut Deontay Johnson. I think Schultz is probably a pretty good sneaky play here, especially with the 1.5 point bonus on FFPC that you get. There's definitely a world here where Nico just doesn't have a huge game and Schultz gets a touchdown and maybe 4 catches, something like that.
I'm looking at it right now, I'm trying to load it right now as far as what Collins' ownership was in the playoff challenge that ended up locking at the start of the wild card round. And I'm God bless it. I thought I was going to have it here.
It was like 38%, something like that.
38%. Okay. So to me, for Nico Collins, that's kind of low, right? But I guess if Mixon was dinged up coming into that, then it would have been probably quite a bit higher. knowing that we are dealing with a Mixon injury, what do you think? What's your best guess at what the ownership is going to be like for Nico Collins coming into the playoff challenge too here, Chris?
Well, the other thing was that people could fade the Texans, which I think a lot of people did
It's a great
for
point.
the
Yeah.
first one. So for this one, where you have to play everyone from every single game, I would bet that we see. I think the floor for Nico Collins is like 65, 70%, and it's probably closer to that 70 to 75% really, because I just, especially with the Mixon thing, I don't think Schultz gets higher than like 15, 20%. So yeah, Nico's going to be pretty popular here. Probably one of the most popular guys in the whole tournament for this round.
The God, I wish I could find this, and I apologize to everybody. I thought I was going to have it, but it may not make a difference because the Texans could be one and done. And a team that I think a lot of people are discounting because we're so excited for this Ravens-Bills game is the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's talk about the ground game first. Pacheco, I think, would have been interesting given how the Chiefs want to win games, and that's with defense and running the football, similar to kind of how they won last year. We saw a big time emphasis on the ground game because that defense is so good. The defense is good again this year too. But Kareem Hunt, who got signed mid-season when Pacheco went down, it's kind of been those two guys sharing the load in the backfield. And then I think that they kind of cannibalize each other here a little bit. And it's really difficult for me to say, oh yeah, I want Pacheco. Oh yeah, I want Kareem Hunt as a pivot play. I think the ownership for these guys is going to be low and deservedly so. I can't really make a good case here, Chris, for wanting to roster either one of these running backs. Can you make a good case for it?
No, I don't think so. And I found the ownership for the tournament, and both these guys were sub 1%. So, I don't think these guys get much love in this round either. I think Kelsey will be super popular. Then people will probably dabble in the receiver. So the running backs, I don't think you can risk a roster spot on a split backfield for an offense that it's not the Lions rushing game. It's not like a super high powered one. So I think people probably just stay away from this one, and I probably would too.
So if that's the case, and I happen to agree with you, and obviously 99+% of FFPC players are going to agree with us. The receivers here, Xavier Worthy got 16% ownership in the playoff challenge that locked last week. Hollywood Brown 1.35, DeAndre Hopkins 0.38. Yuck. So when you look at those two guys as potential pivot plays, is there anything there? I mean, I keep trying to make an argument against Kelsey and against Mahomes, but if you're going to do that, you got to tell yourself a story with one of these receivers. And the story, I think, for Hopkins and Brown, a little too fantastical for me. Similar to how I can't advocate for the running backs, difficult for me to advocate for either Hopkins or Marquise Brown here too.
Yeah, Hopkins is the one that I'm just totally out on. He just doesn't look like he has it anymore. Worthy is definitely the guy I can make a case for because we've seen time and again rookie receivers in this Andy Reid offense take time. Rashee Rice did it last year. They did it back all the way when Andy Reid was coaching the Eagles with Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson. Like it's just been, they never get it right away. And Worthy really came on down the stretch this past year. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a chance that he's the guy you need in this playoff challenge, especially in like maybe an upset happens and it's just one game that you're fading Kelsey, or maybe Kelsey he doesn't turn it on in the playoffs this year. Like we didn't think it was going to happen last year and it did, but maybe this year it just doesn't.
And those whispers get louder as we get deeper into Travis Kelce's career. If you are dead set on fading Kelsey, and you don't like Worthy, it comes down to Patrick Mahomes for me. 80%, 75% of this competition probably will have either Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen at quarterback. Patrick Mahomes is a multi-Super Bowl winning quarterback, a former league MVP, a guy who all he does is win in the playoffs. And certainly when you're talking about double points in the Super Bowl, having a quarterback there is really huge. Patrick Mahomes, should he or shouldn't he be the play for you for the Chiefs this year? Chris, I guess it kind of depends upon how you think the playoff bracket's going to go. That's what it comes down to for me with Mahomes.
Yeah, I think Mahomes is way more viable in this tournament than he is in the one that started last week in the wild card one. Because in the wild card one, you were basically saying, okay, somehow one of Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson don't play 3 games. You were fading like 3 games from those guys, and Mahomes goes to the Super Bowl and is the right chief. In this one of those 2 guys is only getting 1 game, and the other one theoretically, if you're playing Mahomes, would lose to Mahomes the next week. So it's not as crazy for Mahomes in 2 games plus a double Super Bowl point game to outscore these super high scoring quarterbacks like Allen and Lamar. So I think Mahomes is a fun pivot in this tournament. I think you can build some fun lineups that way.
You know, what was fun last week is watching this Washington Commanders team beat Tampa, led by Jayden Daniels. Part of the reason Jayden Daniels has been so good this season has been Zach Ertz. Had a pretty solid year. 66 catches, 654 yards, finds the end zone 7 times. Zach Ertz is going to be good to go for the divisional round. He was dealing with a rib injury. 34 years old. He's still making plays. Zach Ertz as your commander selection to me is such a good pivot off of Terry McLaurin. I wonder if he actually rivals McLaurin for similar ownership. How do you see Ertz being treated by FFPC players in the playoff challenge 2 this weekend, Chris?
I think the down week last week is going to keep his ownership pretty in check. He was, I think, around like 13% in the tournament last week. So I don't think he gets too crazy high here. I think, I was pretty high on him in the pivot in the last tournament, and I was a little disappointed by his game last week. I think all the reasons still apply though for playing him again this week. I do think McLaurin probably has the best matchup in this one, with just Detroit. Like, they're way hurt in the secondary or in their corners, losing Carlton Davis. They will have Terry on Arnold, but man, I'm not afraid to go back to Ertz here. I would be comfortable doing it. I just also think McLaurin is also just a great play in this week.
Well, part of the reason that makes him such a great play is, number one, the total on this game, 55.5, an insane amount. Might be the highest total of the season for all I know. McLaurin this past week against the Buccaneers in that I guess quasi upset game over Tampa down in Florida. McLaurin gets 7 catches for 89 yards. He gets in the end zone as well. A big play guy, which is what you need in a competition like this. Ertz was owned, to your point, 13%. The next highest was the Washington fade, hard fade, 22%. And then the most owned Washington Commanders decision that players made this past week, 40% of people said yes to Terry McLaurin. And I do think that's probably going to be up there again. It's chalky, but is this good chalk? Is this chalk that you want in your lineup here, Chris, with McLaurin?
I'm not. If I was building a handful of lineups, I wouldn't fully fade McLaurin, but I do think it's viable to do it in lineups, especially if you're only doing a few and want to get a little different. We saw all year him be outscored by other receivers. There was a stretch of weeks where Noah Brown was out targeting him like pretty easily. Do I think that's going to happen in this game? No, but like there's times where this offense just kind of runs through Olamide Zacchaeus, Diami Brown, Zach Ertz, the running backs. Like they get the ball to all kinds of guys in this offense. So it would not be crazy for McLaurin to be outscored here.
If you're building a handful of lineups, Chris, do you have to have a Jayden Daniels lineup? A guy who's defied the odds, a guy who just finds a way to win, and a guy who found a way to win last week. Now, this would probably be his biggest, well, not even probably. This would be the biggest win of his young career if he's able to take down the Lions in Detroit. But is having a Jayden Daniels lineup viable to try to win $100,000 with the FFPC in this challenge?
Personally, I don't think so, just because you're asking a lot of you need one of Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson is getting 2 games. Then that guy could theoretically beat the Chiefs and go to the Super Bowl. You also have Jalen Hurts in this tournament. You also have Mahomes, who we just talked about in this tournament.
Mm-hmm. I'm
fine just sticking with Terry McLaurin or Zach Ertz from the Commanders. I don't I'm not betting on the Commanders winning this game in any. I think they could put up a good fight, but I don't think they're winning this game here.
I am with you. I think it's going to be an entertaining game. I think both these teams do numbers. I mean, a 55.5 point total. Yes, I can't wait to spend my Saturday night watching that game. You know who else can't wait for that game is David Montgomery, because he is off the injury report and he is going to be playing against the Commanders Saturday night. Good to go for him. 16 touches on average per game this season in the regular season. And he will be joining Jahmyr Gibbs in the backfield. Now, knowing that Montgomery's back, something that we didn't know, something we thought, but we didn't know before the world famous playoff challenge lineups locked on this past Saturday. We saw Jahmyr Gibbs have 50% ownership, David Montgomery less than 1%. How does Montgomery's official return this week affect Gibbs? Is this an easy pivot off of Gibbs, knowing that Montgomery's sharing the backfield, or do we think that so many more people will be pivoting to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta now that Gibbs actually might be somebody that we want on our teams to try to win 100K?
So I'm making a total guess here because we really don't know what the workload for Montgomery will be. But right now, Gibbs is my highest projected Detroit Lion player this week. And I basically said, I'm going to take what Montgomery did and give him 85% of that. So that's like a 65-35 carry share split for the two. Targets, Gibbs about doubling Montgomery, etc. I hope it pushes people onto Amon-Ra and other things because we don't know. And maybe, but like, what if Montgomery is only playing, I don't know, 10%, 20% of the snaps just to keep him fresh? Maybe they're up big in this game. They don't really need him. Maybe they bring him in on the goal line. That's always possible, but they've always kind of done that with him anyway. If we get Gibbs again, at like a bigger workload than what we saw in the season with Montgomery, he's just a huge smash. Like he without Montgomery, he's probably the running back 1 overall in fantasy. So if we can get Gibbs at, a lessened David Montgomery, and people are afraid of it and go to play Amon-Ra and Laporta or maybe even Jared Goff, I think I'd be very into Gibbs then. At worst, he's still a very good play. At best, he could be the best player in this whole tournament.
And he is the best player on, in my opinion, the best team in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
The Lions, to me, Chris, are the most talent-rich team as for fantasy purposes, more so than anybody, more so than Baltimore, Philadelphia. It doesn't matter. Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. Technically, we're looking at 5 viable options here for the Lions. What about if you say, forget all those guys, I'm going to go with the quarterback? What about Jared Goff? What if he's the answer at quarterback? What if Detroit gets to the Super Bowl and everybody else has St. Brown and they have Gibbs, but you're sitting there with Jared Goff, a guy who had ownership of just 4% in the playoff challenge? I would imagine it's going to be fairly low again. And I would imagine that if you're filling out some lineups, having the starting quarterback on the favorite to win the Super Bowl, not a bad thing.
No, not a bad thing. But I think you got to ask yourself, like, how does this happen? So one, they have to make the Super Bowl, right? There's no 1 or 2 games where Jared Goff is probably the optimal Lion. The second thing is you need Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson not to make the Super Bowl. So you're probably playing, Derrick Henry and James Cook, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of just need Mahomes to not be. It's probably the Chiefs then that they're playing in the Super Bowl. I don't think anybody's betting on the Texans making the Super Bowl. So I think Jared Goff, Kelsey is not the craziest comparison, because certainly Kelsey could be the best tight end in this thing. Mm-hmm. And then it's okay. Well, who are you playing quarterback? If Allen and Lamar don't make it, maybe Jared Goff is who you need. Maybe he just spreads the ball out a ton. So yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all to play Goff with like Kelsey, and you just hope all the fantasy points from the Ravens and Bills, first of all, they lose and don't make the Super Bowl, but also just funnels through the running backs.
The team that they will be playing Sunday afternoon will be the Commanders. We already talked about that. Okay, let's talk. That was Saturday night. Sunday afternoon is the Rams and Eagles. We'll lead things off with the Rams here. Tyler Higbee limited in Wednesday's practice. This was a guy who was in the hospital, Chris. He was coughing up blood. Now, according to Sean McVay, that was just, it kind of surprised the Rams press that it was not a big thing and that he was going to be ready to go. He was limited in practice today, but he was limited in practice yesterday. So this is good that he's got back-to-back limited practices in. Sean McVay expects him to go. Everybody and their mother is going to have Puka Nacua. The people who don't have Nacua will have Kyren Williams. Ain't nobody going to have Tyler Higbee. And Higbee didn't look too bad out there in that game Monday night against the Vikings. Am I too crazy to suggest Higbee here, especially if you're projecting an Eagles victory over the Rams and you're just taking what is going to be a one-off, a one-game scenario where the variance is going to be increased quite a bit, and maybe Higbee's the guy here? How crazy is Higbee for a play this weekend in this challenge?
It's so crazy because he was in the hospital, but then McVay saying we expect him to be full go for this game, which is just crazy that we don't see that very often. I'd be a little scared off it, but if you're right that he is a full go, then yeah, he's totally viable. But I just don't think you really need to do it. I think Kyren Williams is going to be super low owned, and whether they're trailing or not, he's going to catch some passes. He's going to be out there. It's gross, but you could go to Cooper Kupp. It doesn't seem like he has it to me. Puka just feels like such a smash here. I just don't think you need to go away from Puka or Kyren for the Rams here.
You wouldn't have to. I agree with you. Puka Nacua, 73% ownership last week, 17% for Kyren Williams. Let me throw this at you. Let's say you are hell-bent on not taking Nacua or Williams. Chalk be damned. I'm not doing it. I'm going with somebody else. Who would you be more likely to pick? Tyler Higbee or Cooper Kupp?
Oh my God. I can't believe that's a tough question. Because it should be Cooper Kupp, but man, he's just been so bad. I think I'm taking Higbee and just hoping that he is the full go, and he does catch, and he catches the touchdown. Eagles just lost one of their starting linebackers. That theoretically helps the tight ends more than anything else. I'll take my shot with Higbee then.
I wanna look this up right now because I think this is something that's happened to Cooper Kupp. I don't think it's ever happened to Cooper Kupp in his career. When we look at what he's been able to do or what he's not been able to do recently, that dude has not had more than three targets in a game since December 8th, more than a month. Niners, no catches, 3 targets. 3 targets, 3 catches against the Jets. 1 catch against the Cardinals on 3 targets, and then 1 catch against the Vikings on his lone target in that game. Bigger picture here. Cooper Kupp in drafts next year. Is the hate going to go too far? What round would you start looking at Kupp? Knowing what he's done in the past, but also knowing what he's done in the recent past has been putrid, Chris.
I probably, it really will depend where you go. If he's in, I think for me to take a swing at Kupp, I would want to take him probably the 7th or 8th round, around there. I just don't.
So not a double digit round. You're still taking him in round 7 or 8. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
We talked about Kyren Williams a little bit here. My concern with Williams, and it's my concern with just the Rams in general. I don't want this game to get out of hand. Now, because I'm not going to go with all chalk as far as who I think is going to win these games. I don't think the favorites win every single game. In fact, I've already predicted a Rams upset in this game. If you are building your team, projecting the Rams to defeat the Eagles, would Kyren Williams make actually more sense than Puka Nacua, given the game script and given how you think the Rams would beat the Eagles? Wouldn't Kyren Williams make more sense here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely go with Kyron. I think Puka still works in a victory just because he gets so much volume. But I think Kyron, especially now with Blake Corum like out, like he's just back to getting all the work for the Rams. And I think anytime you get that from any running back, that's something that is totally viable in this tournament.
AJ Brown put his book down long enough to practice today, which was a good sign. He's been dealing with a knee issue. They've been resting him a little bit. Last week before the Packers game, limited, no practice, full practice as the week went on. He got no practice in yesterday, limited practice today. 3 targets, 1 catch for 10 yards. And AJ Brown is a guy that is super talented, has put up big numbers in the past. Philly is winning games on the legs of Saquon Barkley rather than the arm of Jalen Hurts and the hands of AJ Brown. Does that mean that Brown is a smart fade, even though the Eagles might go to the Super Bowl this year?
I like taking shots on both Eagles receivers, AJ Brown or Devontae Smith. They're regardless of what happens in this game, they're gonna most likely have to play the Detroit Lions in 2 weeks or next week if they win, and they're gonna have to throw the ball. They're not gonna be able to win every game by running the ball. And then in the Super Bowl, if they got that far, whether it's the Ravens, Bills, Chiefs, they're probably gonna have to throw the ball in that game too.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Eagles just, they do what it takes to win. And like last week versus the Packers, Jordan Love was just making mistake after mistake. They said, let's just run the ball and win this game. And that's all they had to do. I think a similar thing could happen in this Rams game. But after this week, I think they're going to have to open up their passing game a little bit. And we know both AJ Brown and Devontae Smith have huge ceilings and could have big games at any time.
If you were doing one lineup, Chris, and you made the decision that you are fading Barkley, which receiver are you putting on this team, AJ Brown or Devonta Smith?
I'm probably doing Devontae Smith, and it's not because I'm afraid of the AJ Brown injury, but it's because I think that everyone else is like totally ignoring it, and that I think Devontae Smith was pretty low owned. He was there. Let me look.
Yeah, I'm looking at less than 4%. Yeah.
Yeah, 4%. So like I don't think the injury is a problem, but I would bet that there's a percentage chance that it is a problem for AJ Brown. And if everyone else is going to ignore that percentage chance, just give me the guy that's going to be super low owned and I think is just as talented.
Dallas Goedert had a great play for a touchdown in that game. Where he stiff-armed Carrington Valentine into oblivion. And people have been making a big deal. Oh, he just was a man-child on that play. Well, he outweighs Carrington Valentine by 70 pounds. Like, if he does not do that, we have a problem with Goddard. So, but it was a great play, and he got in the end zone. And this is a guy that has been, hit or miss most of the season. He's been dealing with injuries this season as well. An illness knocked him out of practice today. I don't think that is going to carry over to Sunday. What do you make of a leverage play of Dallas Goedert here with no Barkley, no Eagles receivers, no Hurts? What do you make of Goedert in this competition, knowing it's tight end premium?
Yeah, I think he makes sense in like an Eagles loss or something. I would be a little afraid of having him in an Eagles lineup that gets an Eagles player for multiple games. We've definitely seen in the past, like he can get pretty involved in the Eagles offense. It hasn't really been so much this year just because he's been banged up so much, but he's definitely healthy now. But still, I'd rather, if I'm playing an Eagles win, I'm probably not playing him, but I think he's totally viable in an Eagles loss.
I want to talk about the quarterback for Philadelphia here before we move on to the final game, the big game on Sunday night between Baltimore and Buffalo. I thought the Packers defense did a pretty good job against Jalen Hurts in that game Sunday afternoon. Now, you could make the case that Hurts didn't have to do a lot because he wasn't asked to do a lot. Coming off, basically 3 weeks without playing meaningful NFL football in a game, maybe that's the proper way to handle him. He gets 6 carries for 36 yards. Okay, you'll take that. 13 of 21, just for 131 yards. He did get 2 touchdowns as well. Knowing he was coming off the concussion, knowing that there's a non-zero chance, and I quite frankly a better than a non-zero chance that Philadelphia makes it to the Super Bowl. Would you trust Jalen Hurts? I know people that don't trust Jalen Hurts in general when he's healthy, and he is healthy right now, but coming off the concussion. What's your feeling on Jalen Hurts in this competition as your quarterback? And even if you don't pick him as your quarterback, he's the guy throwing to all these other players. What's your trust level with Hurts?
I still have enough trust in him to play him. I think he's a similar play to Jared Goff. Like they just spread the ball around enough. He gets those tush push touchdowns that we've seen all year. He's probably got a higher ceiling than Goff because of that. So yeah, I'm totally fine playing him. And I think they were definitely trying to knock off some rust for him. We've seen them open up their passing game at times this season. It's definitely looked like it's gone away at other times this season. It would be interesting if we could ever find out like what the messaging from the coaches is to him, because it seems like they're like, just don't lose the game for us. Like don't make mistakes. And he's been really good at doing that. So it's like, is it because the coaches are telling him to do these things, or is it him that's doing these things? Obviously, we would all love him to play like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. I don't think we're going to get anything like that. But I think we've seen enough. If you go farther back in his career, like we know he has it in him to open it up and pass the ball well. He throws a beautiful deep ball, and he's got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, who are both very good at catching deep balls. I think there's definitely still some. You should have. I wouldn't be worried about Jalen Hurts moving the offense if they really do need to.
Hurts is if Philadelphia advances, he's going to be a big reason. Whether he's piping the ball downfield 35, 40 times a game, or whether he's just asked to manage the game, he's going to do numbers. And that's something that we'll have to be watching for not only this weekend, but beyond if the Eagles move on. Okay, let's talk about the big Sunday night game, the Ravens and the Bills. Zay Flowers, I believe, did not practice once again today for the Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers, the first drafted receiver by Baltimore to make a Pro Bowl with the Ravens. John Harbaugh said earlier this week that Flowers can play even if he doesn't practice, but if that's the case, he's definitely not 100%, could be a decoy as a receiver. We said last week that Flowers was pretty much unplayable, especially when it came out that he was going to be out on Friday. He was already ruled out that day. This is another game another week where their game is the final game of the weekend. And by the time the lineup's locked for this Saturday afternoon, you're still not going to know the official status of Zay Flowers unless he's already been ruled out, in which case you're not playing him anyway. Are we just avoiding Zay Flowers in this contest? Can we wash our hands of it? Or is there something to be said for, hey, maybe this guy does play in limited capacity against Buffalo in a high-scoring game, and then they move on to the AFC Championship, again, potentially another high-scoring game, and then he gets double points in the Super Bowl. For a player that is probably not going to be high-owned on a lot of teams, what's your a way to approach Zay Flowers for this competition, Chris?
Yeah, I don't think you can play Flowers. There was a report that made it sound like he was a long shot to play this week, and with so few games, like you can't afford a zero at any position. And we're not talking. This isn't Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or Puka Nacua. Like Flowers is not a guy that like when he's in there, he's going to have a big game. So I think you just wash your hands and move on from Flowers. There's other Ravens options you can use here.
And one of those options is the guy who rumbled for 186 yards this past week in the game against the Steelers in Baltimore. 2 touchdowns. It was King Henry. Derrick Henry was owned in the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge on 55% of teams. 55% is where he came in. Now, that was the second highest for running backs next to Saquon Barkley, who was the most owned running back in this competition. Henry, again, if you're, I guess it comes down to this. It's real simple. If you foresee a deep Baltimore run, Henry is a great choice along with Lamar Jackson. If you see the Ravens going out right away, maybe you want to pivot to Mark Andrews or Rashad Bateman if you really want to get cute here. But I think that's what it comes down to. If you're deciding whether or not to put Henry in, it just comes down to how deep you think the Ravens go in the playoffs, right, Chris?
Yeah, it's you when you're filling out your thing, make your bracket, and who are you picking to win? Bills, Ravens. If you're picking the Ravens to win, go with Henry or Lamar. If you're picking the Bills, play anyone but Henry or Lamar. Play Andrews, play Bateman, whatever. I think that's the decision you have to make.
If you are fading one of these players, or excuse me, fading both those players, Henry and Jackson, if that's the case, who makes the better play? Is it Rashad Bateman, who would ostensibly be the number one wide receiver for Baltimore? Or is it Mark Andrews, a guy who's been catching a lot of touchdowns and would be getting his points tabulated in tight end premium scoring here? Bateman or Andrews as the leverage play for Baltimore for you, Chris?
For me, it would be Andrews. I mean, last week we only saw Bateman with a 10% target share. Andrews with 16% target share. Give me that with the tight end premium scoring, the high touchdown upside. I think the Bills' outside corners are pretty good. I think where you attack the Bills is the middle of the field. So I like Andrews there. And I wouldn't hate if somebody threw Isaiah Likely in a lineup. In a one-game
Oh, yeah.
sample, he could certainly outscore all these guys if you have Ravens losing.
Wonder what I'm just curious to look at it because likely I think was the leading receiver for the Ravens this past week. He was owned in fewer than 1% of
Yeah.
lineups this past week. So yeah, but it's a good way to be different. Especially, I mean, if Buffalo wins that game and Baltimore goes down and likely has a touchdown, he might be the right Raven to own, especially if Henry gets slowed up by that Bills rush defense. Let's move on to Buffalo. Amari Cooper caught 2 passes on 3 targets in the win over the Broncos. He gets 8 yards. I think he's in, what's with these guys named Cooper? These guys that had this greatness, this fantasy greatness over the last couple of years that has just fallen off the face of the earth this year. Amari Cooper was one of my favorite plays in drafting season for 2024 because it always seems like he outperforms where you get him in drafts. Finally, that was not the case this year. He did not outperform it. He is on Buffalo. He is not catching a lot of passes for the Bills, and he is a guy that I think when he got traded to Buffalo, people thought that, okay, maybe this is going to be the Diggs now in this offense that they needed. Khalil Shakir has kind of been a poor man's version of Stephon Diggs, and I don't know what Cooper's been. Keon Coleman's still getting some looks. Obviously, the tight ends of Kincaid and Knox are taking away looks from Cooper. Similar to Cooper Kupp, is Amari Cooper a must fade in this competition as well?
Yeah, I've been out on Amari Cooper for a little while now since he got to the Bills. I mean, he ran less routes than Matt Collins last week, less than Keon Coleman, less than Curtis Samuel. Yeah, no receiver ran less routes than him last week. It's just I don't know. I don't know if he doesn't have it anymore, or if they just really like rotating these guys, and he just happens to be on the end of that thing. I'm out on Amari, and I think it's hard to pick any of these receivers really.
The tight ends, Dalton Kincaid. We know he has it in him. We've seen him do it. Just haven't really seen him do it in 2024. What are the chances that he goes on a heater where him and Allen are hooking up and he's getting like, a 5, 6, 7 catch game, 60, 70 yards, maybe getting into the end zone here. He's going to have the opportunity if the Bills get to the Super Bowl for 3 games. If you're fading Josh Allen, is Dalton Kincaid the best pass catcher if you don't want to go James Cook?
I would probably it's him or Shakir, and it's probably close, but it's not pretty for Kincaid. I definitely don't think you want the Bills going to the Super Bowl if you're using either of those guys. I don't see a world where they're the optimal Bills player and over James Cook or Josh Allen in multiple games. Maybe you can, if the Bills lose, you can catch, Kincaid does catch the touchdown. He gets the tight end premium scoring, but he's barely running 50% of the routes too. They are just really rotating their entire receiving weaponry right now, and it's just really hard to like nail down one guy.
I think that I don't know. I should look at this before I say anything. Josh Allen, in the world famous playoff challenge last week, his ownership was sitting at 49%, the most owned quarterback. And I think it just makes perfect sense that he would be, given there's not great pivots on that. But I do think, and you know what's wild about this, and I'm going to ask you for your game predictions in the next segment. Buffalo's the 2 seed and they're at home and they're an underdog, which really surprised me. And I guess if that's the case and Baltimore wins, then Josh Allen should be a fade in this competition. You want Cook, you want Shakir. Something that I think, as we look at how the ownership percentages shake out after lineups lock, I think that's going to be one of the first things I look at, is to see how people handle the Bills in this contest. If Josh Allen is going to be on the winning roster here for this 100K, he's got to make it to the Super Bowl, right? There's no way he's on the winning roster if the Bills don't get there.
I don't know. I think he, if I remember correctly, not in the main, not the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2 in the main tournament last year. I think he was the optimal QB in just 2 games, which is pretty rare in the history of this tournament. I don't know, because it's so hard to pick a pivot. I think he could be the optimal QB, and Derrick Henry is just the reason the Ravens go on a run, or Travis Kelce does turn it on again, and that he is the reason they go on a run. Saquon Barkley leads the Eagles to the Super Bowl. Jahmyr Gibbs or Amon-Ra St. Brown lead the line. Like, I think you have some outs here where Allen's your QB, even if they lose to the Ravens, if just none of the other Bills guys really have good games. And it's just because they spread the ball around, Allen rushes it in, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's another thing to consider, right? That even if Allen doesn't go deep, he still could be the correct Bill to own as far as your optimum lineup goes. That's, I know there's fewer choices you got to make in this challenge with only an 8-player lineup, but man, they get more crucial. They get more maddening. It gets more fun. Check it out. The FFPC Playoff Challenge 2, myffpc.com is where to go. I will tell you more about that when we come back, because Chris and I are both going to build our lineups in this challenge. And longtime listener, or longtime viewer, I should say, Tom Smith in the YouTube chat right now, he posted his lineup. We're going to go to his first. We'll get some thoughts on what we think of his lineup in this competition, as he and everybody else is chasing $100,000 grand prize in the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman and Chris Wecht is back right after this. Don't go anywhere. So much more to get to.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, but they let him be the quarterback for a long time too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. There's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl.
And
when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman, and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky,
no way,
is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
21 minutes until the top of the hour. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman. He is Chris Wecht from Fantasy Points and Fantasy Points Data. Check him out on the X at Chris Wecht FF. So excited to have so many people chiming in with their thoughts on the playoffs as we get ready for the Divisional Challenge. And there's no NFL Divisional Challenge weekend that's complete without entering the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2. $100,000 grand prize is up for grabs at a $200 entry fee. Remember, these are 8-player lineups that you are forming. There is no draft. There is no salary cap. There is just formulating your lineups, which only takes minutes. The one slant, 1 player per team. Can't load up on Lions or load up on Chiefs or anything like that. You have to pick 1 player from each of the 8 teams that are left to form an FFPC slim lineup: quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and 2 flexes. Join now at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. To lead things off in this segment, before Chris, we get to your lineup, before we get to mine, let's talk about Tom Smith's lineup that he has formulated for this competition. So right now he has Jared Goff in as his quarterback. He is rocking a 4 running back lineup here with Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, James Cook, and Kyren Williams. And then his receivers will be Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin, and Xavier Worthy. Are we missing? I think we're missing a tight end here, Tom, now that I look at it. Unless the Jay Cook is Jared Cook, who I believe is out of the league. I think we're missing a tight end there. Otherwise, I mean, other than that, it looks awesome. Where do you stand? And Chris, I know you did the big advice article for Fantasy Points in your research. I looked at the previous winners, went back 3 or 4 years in this. It seemed by and large these were wide receiver heavy lineups that were winning the whole thing. Was that kind of your take as well? I normally think that in a small 4-week thing, you're better off loading up on running backs. But a lot of receiver dominated teams have won this in the past. Won the 500,000 in the past.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up the exact number, but yeah, it was pretty rare for these running back heavy teams to go super far in this thing. I think that was just the nature of the field or the teams in the playoffs. This year is pretty unique in the type of running backs that we have in the playoffs between Henry, Barkley, Mixon, Kyren, Gibbs, James Cook. Like these are all like very good running backs. Yeah, here we go. So top 150 teams in that tournament, only about 30% of them have at least 4 running backs.
Oh, wow.
So most of them are playing 2 or 3.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so very rare. 5 of them, only 5% of those teams had 5 running backs or more. So, but I think this is a different year. I said that in the article. Like I think this was a year that you could play 3, 4, probably not 5, but you could get up to 4 running backs on your teams. And I think that kind of carries over to this tournament as well. I'm totally fine with this lineup. I would probably like it because you're playing Goff. You really don't have to get too crazy everywhere. You've got Goff, you've got Kyren, so you're also fading Puka there. Turn that Xavier Worthy into a Travis Kelce, and I think you're good to go here.
Did we talk about David Montgomery's viability? I mean, is he off the table for you as far as a Lion goes?
He's off the table for me. Like, how much is he even going to be played? Like, if he somehow is the right guy, it's going to be so low owned that it probably doesn't hurt you.
Okay.
I think anybody else will have him. The Lions just have like between Gibbs, Amon-Ra, Goff, Laporta. Like I'd rather, if I'm divvying up my Lions shares, I'd rather get to one of those guys.
If we're looking at viable running backs in this competition with the 8 teams that are left, based on our conversations in the previous segment, Chris, Joe Mixon, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyren Williams, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and James Cook. So you basically have, what is that, 6 to choose from, I think? The only teams that we're not looking at running backs are the Commanders and Chiefs, right?
Yep, that's it. That's got to be pretty rare that we have that
Yeah.
many running back options.
Sam Robinson, by the way, chiming in on YouTube, are the FFPC playoffs still tight end premium? There has never, and I mean never, been a league in the FFPC that has not been tight end premium. So yes, the postseason contest that we have here at the FFPC still tight end premium as well. Going forward here with my lineup, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Chris. I'm going to do backfield and then I'll do pass catchers. So in my backfield, I am going with a quarterback and 3 running backs here. I have Jared Goff as my line. We kind of talked about why that may or may not be viable with all those other options in Detroit. But I have him as my quarterback and my Lions representative. The 3 running backs are pretty chalky here. Saquon Barkley, probably going to be the most owned Philadelphia Eagle in this competition. Derrick Henry, probably going to be the most owned Baltimore Raven in this competition. And then I'm going James Cook. Since I have Goff at quarterback, I have to pick another Bill. I ended up going with Cook. What do you make of my guys behind the center? Goff, Barkley, Cook, and Henry.
I think it's viable. I might consider moving off Barkley in a Jared Goff lineup because you're basically saying that the Eagles don't go to the Super Bowl if you're playing Jared Goff. And you've got another running back in your team already. But other than that, I think everything else is totally viable.
And then in that case, then I would shift probably to a 2 running back attack with Henry and Cook, and then I add on. Well, I have a 2 tight end attack here as well. So let me do the remainder of the team here. Wide receivers, I'm going with 2 of them: Terry McLaurin, Puka Nacua. Again, McLaurin probably going to be the most owned Commander. Nacua definitely going to be the most owned Ram. And then for my tight ends, I'm going with Travis Kelce, and I am pivoting to Dalton Schultz. I don't want to go crazy with a bunch of leverage plays here, but Schultz is my pivot off of Mixon. He's my pivot off of Collins here. I'm betting in this scenario that the Texans end up going out right away, but I'm hoping that Schultz has this 5, 6, maybe 7 catch game for around 70 yards. Maybe he gets into the end zone. Nico Collins, to your point earlier, maybe he is slowed up or potentially even shut down by the Chiefs corners, and then Mixon just not himself dealing with that ankle injury that he suffered on Wednesday. So my pass catchers, pretty chalky again here: McLaurin, Nacua, Travis Kelce, and Dalton Schultz. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, so with Schultz in there gives you a lot of flexibility. Like that's the reason I was like, you don't have to move off of Barkley, because I think you could just play the best Eagle, and then maybe there's a world where Goff can work even if they don't go to the Super Bowl and the Eagles do. So yeah, Schultz. I think Schultz is a really nice piece in general in all these lineups because he just gives you so much flexibility. And then if you're playing Goff and Schultz, yeah, play the best plays everywhere. Play McLaurin, play Puka, play Travis Kelce. I think that all works totally fine.
So my lineup for the FFPC Playoff Challenge 2, as it stands right now, Goff is my quarterback. The running backs are Barkley, Cook, and Henry. I'm going with McLaurin and Nacua as my receivers, and the tight ends are Travis Kelce and Dalton Schultz. Chris, let's get to your lineup. Before we get to the actual players, when you sit down and actually build a lineup, what's your approach? What's the first thing you're looking at? What are you trying to figure out before you're actually placing these players onto your roster?
So the first thing you got to do is basically build your bracket. How do you see the games going? Decide who you have in the Super Bowl, who's losing to who. And then from that point, you're kind of like, then you just open up your mind to how that happens. If I have the Lions and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, what does that mean happens on the Bills and Ravens? And what does that mean for the Eagles? If I have the Rams upsetting the Eagles, what does that mean for the Rams? What does that mean and just kind of, so pick what teams you want winning for your for whatever line, for however many lineups you're doing, and then just kind of think through how does the game script look for those players? Are they going to be passing a lot? Are they going to be up? Maybe they're running more, and so on.
So for this lineup that you formulated, did you build a bracket specifically for this team?
Yep, pretty much. So
okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's go through all these games and figure out who you have going to the Super Bowl. Texans at Chiefs. You have the Chiefs winning? No. Yes, you do. Right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, and then the Saturday evening game, Commanders at Lions.
Yeah, Lions,
Lions, okay. Rams at Eagles,
Eagles.
and then Ravens at Bills.
This is the toss-up one, but right now I've got Bills.
So that is all. I believe that's all the home teams you picked, right? Yeah.
Yes, I did pick
Yeah.
all
Okay.
them.
So that means in the conference championships, who is winning when the Bills visit the Chiefs?
I got the Bills right now.
Okay. And then who is winning when the Eagles go to Detroit?
So I am an Eagles fan, so this hurts my heart, but I think it's the Lions.
Well, it hurts your heart, but it's making a lot of America happy because you have a Bills-Lions Super Bowl, something that I think would be a lot of fun. We're getting a first-time champ in that case. It doesn't really matter for the playoff challenge, but who wins that game?
I think Josh Allen finally gets it done. I think this is his year.
So you have a Bills over Lions in the Super Bowl, which would explain why you have Josh Allen in at quarterback. Probably going to be the league MVP. In this case, he probably would be the Super Bowl MVP. It goes without saying, if you are building a lineup based on the Bills getting to the Super Bowl, you almost have to have Josh Allen in there, don't you?
Yeah, and I kind of talked through earlier how I think you have some outs in them losing one game or him not making it to the Super Bowl. I mean, one game is a little thin, but I think he's still there. But 2 games, I think he's still pretty viable. And then obviously, if he's in the Super Bowl, you're probably going to need Josh Allen.
Your running backs, looks like you're rocking 2 of them here. You're going with Joe Mixon for Houston, and then obviously Jahmyr Gibbs for the Lions. You said how excited you were about Gibbs. You said how are you projecting him to be the most owned player in this contest, or is that did I miss? Okay, so but the most owned Lion, right?
Yes, I think so. I think it'll be closer than it was in the first tournament between him and Amon-Ra, but I still think he'll be the most popular Lion.
In the playoff challenge number 1, or AKA the world famous playoff challenge, Gibbs was owned in just over 50%, Amon-Ra St. Brown 36%. You think that gets closer to, maybe 45, 40 or somewhere around there?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then Mixon was your Houston player. You had the Chiefs winning that game. You could have gone Collins. You could have gone Schultz. You went Mixon here. And I think you made this point earlier. Game script doesn't really necessarily matter to him because whether they're running, whether they're throwing, Mixon's going to be involved.
Yeah, so that was my thought process when I first built this lineup early in the day. Kind of talking through the injury stuff does kind of want me to make this pivot and switch him and I'll be looking to see what the injury stuff kind of leads up to before kickoff, but kind of makes me want to switch it to like Kyron Williams and then put Nico in. But I'm gonna keep an eye on the news there, but I really do think Mixon's totally viable in a loss though, just because he's gonna be out there and they throw it to him.
The receivers here, 3 of them. Puka Nacua, no surprise for the Rams. A.J. Brown for the Eagles, and then Terry McLaurin is going to be your Commanders representative. I get McLaurin, I get Nacua. They're going to be 2 of the most owned, players on their teams. We talked about this earlier between A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and you said Smith, but here you picked Brown. What's your thought process on why A.J. Brown made the most sense for you on this specific squad?
So I think I just have enough differentiating points because A.J. Brown's also one, but not as much one of Devontae Smith. I think Mixon's going to be different enough. I think we'll get to him on it. We haven't mentioned my other big differentiating point yet, but I just don't know if I quite need it. And in a world where I do have the Eagles and Lions playing each other in the NFC Championship game, I couldn't quite pull myself off of taking A.J. Brown off that team. And then if they did make the Super Bowl, I wouldn't be dead because I think, A.J. Brown's probably fully healed by that Super Bowl game, and Gibbs could still be fine even if the Lions did lose there.
What was the other differentiating point you said we didn't discuss?
I have 2 tight ends, and one of them is Mark
Andrews.
Yeah.
So you got Mark Andrews. Yeah,
Kelsey
and Mark Andrews here are the 2 tight ends. the thing is, when you have two tight ends, you could have chosen Derrick Henry for Baltimore if you really wanted. But the pivot to Andrews, was this just a case of wanting to be different here?
That, and I've also got the Ravens losing in this game. So I
So it's a
didn't
one
want
game.
Henry. I
Yeah.
didn't want Lamar, and if they're down, they're probably throwing the ball. And I think this is a good matchup for Andrews. He's done it for so long. He got much better as the season went along. I wouldn't hate if somebody wanted to like take this lineup and throw Isaiah Likely in it. I think that's fine too. But yeah, I'm betting on the guy that we've seen have huge ceilings in the past.
So Chris Wecht from Fantasy Points, your playoff challenge 2 lineup is as follows. Josh Allen at quarterback, Joe Mixon, Jahmyr Gibbs are the running backs. The receivers are Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, and Terry McLaurin, and then Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce at tight end. Let me throw this at you because I think this is an interesting thing to talk about. Who are some of the players in this competition that you would only play if you had multiple teams, but yet are still not too crazy to have on your rosters, right? You think about some of these pivot plays for Baltimore, for instance, Rashad Bateman, for Kansas City, Xavier Worthy, for the Rams, Tyler Higbee. Who are some of the players that are not too crazy yet are going to be some of the lower owned players in this competition that still give you a chance at that 6-figure grand prize?
Yeah, I think all the ones you mentioned already. Isaiah Likely, I've brought him up a few times.
Yeah.
I think Hollywood Brown falls into that bucket as well. It'll be interesting to see how popular like Sam Laporta is, because he feels like everybody's like clear like third or fourth option that they want to play from the Lions, but he's certainly not crazy to play. I think we've got Puka, Higbee. No one else from Kansas City. Washington, I think it's really just Terry and Ertz. Yeah, so I think that's everybody. I'm not taking any shots on any of the other for me, it's from the Bills. It's Josh Allen and James Cook. It's so hard to get those receivers right now.
We didn't bring them up before when we were talking about the Commanders, but with a 55.5 point total, knowing that there's going to be a lot of throwing in this game, Austin Eckler, does he not cross that line? Is he too crazy for this competition? I mean, if you're projecting a Commander's loss and Eckler catches like 7 balls, I mean, you could tell yourself a story, I guess.
Yeah, he's probably not too crazy. I mean, he's definitely the receiving back, and if they get down quick in this one, I don't see how he's not out there most of the time. The problem comes that like Jayden Daniels is much more likely to take off and scramble than he is to check down to Eckler. But it's if I had 20 something lineups, yeah, sure. I don't think Eckler's a problem. 10 or less, I'm probably doing something else.
If you want to submit 20 or so, 10 or so, or even just one over at myffpc.com, it's the playoff challenge 2. That's where you can register. Again, Chris and I built these teams in minutes today. Myffpc.com. If you want to join, enter these lineups or enter your own, feel free to do so. It might end up being a $100,000 payday. There's still a chance for you to win 6 figures. And I will say this too, we are behind last year's pace. Neither one of these contests is probably going to reach sellout. I said in the FFPC email that I sent out earlier today, we don't like using the word overlay. We hate the word overlay, yet we could see some overlay in this competition. So get in while the getting's good right now. $35 gets you eligible for 25 grand. $200 gets you eligible for $100,000. Myffpc.com is where to go for that. Chris, we just have a little bit of an extra minute or two here. I know you crunch all the numbers. You're making all these great projections for Fantasy Points over there, doing excellent work. The 2024 season as a whole, 1 or 2 takeaways from this season that stood out to you that you will be applying to 2025? I know it's a difficult question to answer because each season is so unique, but the things that you took away from this season, stuff that you didn't see coming, stuff that when you look back at this season, stuff that happened that you really thought there was no possibility of it at the start of the season, or as a projections guy, I guess you have to allow for the possibility of everything.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is don't underestimate just like how much volume rookie or like year 2 receivers can get in certain offenses. So I was pretty low on Malik Neighbors coming into the year, not because I didn't like Malik Neighbors, as the player. I just thought Daniel Jones and the Giants offense wasn't going to be very good. Did I think that he could possibly have like 35% target shares every week? No, but that was possible. And then we kind of saw that with Brian Thomas Jr., Lad McConkey. Like it just kind of kept happening over and over. So that's something I want to remember going forward, is that we don't need to see elite volume for elite volume to happen. Like usually we're reserving that for Puka Nacua and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. But sometimes certain offenses just funnel all their volume to certain guys.
Chris Wecht is the director of analytics for Fantasy Points data. Follow him on the X at Chris Wecht FF. 2023 Best Ball Data Bowl finalist, and you're doing NFL and UFL projections. I've been following the UFL the last couple of years. I did not know you were doing projections for that as well. Are you going to continue that when the league starts up again in March?
That's the plan. Jake Trivy over at Fantasy Points, he helps me out with those as well. But yeah, we I believe last year we had the most accurate projections in the industry of the people that do cover the UFL. I took down a big draft or daily fantasy contest at some point last season using those projections. Yeah, can't recommend doing that enough. It's a fun sport. It's a lot of old NFL names you get to watch.
And then some guys that are still trying to make their way back as well. Jake Bates for one of them last year.
Yep. Absolutely.
At Chris Wecht FF, is that the best place to keep posted on everything, all the content that you're turning out? Obviously, besides fantasypoints.com, where everything gets listed there, but all the updates, Chris Wecht FF.
Yep, that's it.
All right, you're the man. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Join the FFPC Playoff Challenge too, myffpc.com. We will be back at 7 o'clock next Thursday with Yahoo's Scott Pianowski. He'll chop it up and get us set for conference championships. Chris, can't thank you enough, man. This is so much fun. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks.
For Chris Wecht and our producer, Matt Deutsch, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Enjoy the games this weekend, everybody.